We're doing this talk today as a part of our Alan S. Brown Scholar Series. Alan S. Brown was a naval officer for 23 years, a decorated veteran of the Vietnam War, and we hold these talks in memory of his dedication to community and education. We have a co-sponsor today. I want to say thank you to the Haberman Institute for Jewish Studies. High-quality, in-depth encounters with Jewish thought, history, and culture, as George's reflections today will surely do. You can learn more about the Institute's other lectures, classes, and cultural events at habermaninstitute.org. That's Haberman Institute.org, and they really do have a lot of good programs coming up, so I encourage everyone to check out. Mention one other talk we have coming up 2 weeks from today, November 19th. Eugene Fidel, who is a Jewish veteran of the Coast Guard and a legal scholar, is going to give a talk on current issues in military justice. He's really one of the foremost scholars around in that area, so it should be an interesting talk. Same time in 2 weeks, November 19th. Before we get to George, I want to introduce Bob Jacobs. Bob is the chairman of the Jewish War Veterans of the USA Vietnam Veterans Committee. And I asked Bob to say a few words about what the committee's doing and particularly what they're doing with the museum. Go ahead, Bob.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Michael. Hello, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Bob Jacobs. I'm chairman, as Mike just said, of the National Vietnam Veterans Committee. And we just completed one project where we gathered the stories of about 90 Jews who served in the military during the whole Vietnam period from around 1958 or 59 to 1975, some boots on the ground, some in the water around Vietnam, some wherever Uncle Sam happened to put them. We published it on a disc, and we're going to be turning it over to the museum for general sale as soon as the copyright is completed, which should be soon, I hope. And we're also working on another project, which if you go into the, when you get the December edition of the Jewish Veteran, those of you who are members of JWV, there will be an ad asking for donations of objects as well as money, because we are working on the early stages of working a special Vietnam exhibit at the museum, in addition to the general exhibit where Vietnam is included as part of the exhibit of Jews who served in the military. I think, Mike, I think that's about it.
All right, thanks a lot, Bob. So I became aware of George when his memoir was published in Moment magazine in the spring. The kid was published in April, and it was this beautifully written, really personal story about Vietnam and how it motivated his life after, entitled When One's Duty and the Right Thing Are Not the Same. One of the questions, at the museum, we tell the story of Jews serving in the military, in the American military. And one of the questions that I like to ask is did being Jewish affect your military experience? And did your military experiences affect being Jewish? And, a lot of times the answer is no. They were two separate things that didn't come together. But reading George's memoir in Moment, this is one of the times that it came together in a really interesting way, particularly the second question about how your military experiences affected being Jewish. So with that, Georgie Johnson is a Washington-based lawyer and writer. Since 2013, he has been a senior editor at Moment magazine, which everybody should be reading. It's a large circulation, independent American Jewish magazine. Johnson's Jewish word columns will appear periodically in Moment, as have his symposium interviews of dozens of famous Jews, ranging from great rabbis and novelists to concert pianists and Israeli leaders. His symposium-based ebook, What Will the Jewish World Look Like in 2050, was published in 2017. Johnson's articles on Jewish life have also appeared in the journal Jewish Ideas and Ideals, Conservative Judaism, B'nai B'rith magazine, Midstream, and Shema, and been quoted in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. So with that, I'd like to bring George Johnson up.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you, Bob. And thank you to the National Museum of American Jewish Military History for inviting me to speak today, and to the co-sponsor, the Haberman Institute for Jewish Studies, for co-sponsoring. My friend Joel Swerdlow was with me in the backyard, 6 feet apart and with masks on, a few weeks ago. We were talking about this event, and he gave me some advice. He said that I should start out with telling you what I would like you to walk away with at the end of the talk, and to tell some stories to make my points. And I'm going to follow his advice. What I would like you to walk away with is to have an appreciation for what happens when a soldier performs his duty, even though he has moral and political reservations about the war that he is fighting and what he is doing in the war. And also whether and how being Jewish influences what he does at the time and how it influences him in his life afterward. We're going to be leaving a substantial amount of time for questions at the end. And I think Mike will be curating that. So if you have questions as I go along, please type them into the chat, and he will review them. And if your name is clear, he will call on you to ask your question at the time. So with that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my background as growing up, to give you some context of what was happening to me and my experience in Vietnam. I grew up as a Jew in a Christian world. It was Long Island, New York, in the 1940s and early 1950s. I had a sense of being different. And I was the only Jew in my elementary school until 4th grade. And when I played outside with the boys around our block, sometimes I was called names, which wasn't very pleasant. And so I responded by trying to punch the ball over their heads, or with a stick ball, hit it over their heads. And that could be an image for most of my growing up, which is to try to prove that I was as good or better than they were. The second thing about me was that I was a patriotic American. The highlight of my year was Memorial Day. My father was a volunteer fireman, and he marched every year in the Memorial Day parade in Port Washington, Long Island, in his uniform. It had white pants, a red shirt with all these beautiful gold buttons, and his hat. And I was very proud of him, and I look forward to it every year. When I got to high school, I was selected as the flag bearer of the class, which meant that at assemblies that I held the American flag, and at graduation and at basketball games, maybe a bit other times. There was another flag bearer also. We switched off flags. One had the school flag and one had the American flag. The other thing, I won the Rotary Club scholarship from Port Washington for citizenship. So I was a person that really valued American values and citizenship. So I went off to college, and the freshman year I was at Cornell. ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, was voluntary, and I decided, after some thought, I was draft age and eligible for the draft. I decided I'd like to be an officer if I was going to serve, and so I signed up. At that time, it was really, there were no moral issues to consider, because I basically equated America with moral values, and I knew that if I was going to be in the Army, that I would be an example or participating in the American ideals. So that wasn't a problem for me. But by the time I got to law school, and after I had accepted my commission, things started to change. I got my commission in June 1964, and there was no war. It was peacetime. But after I got to law school, and I was on a 3-year deferral of my active duty, the Vietnam War started to build up, starting in the summer of 1964. And by the time I graduated, there were over 500,000 American troops in Vietnam. And over that 3-year period in law school, I began to believe that the war was politically and morally wrong. And I had a roommate, Bruce, who also graduated from Cornell with a second lieutenant commission. And we talked about it, and we were both against the war. And we knew that there was a time in the future that we might, in fact, be going to Vietnam. We didn't know. But I started expressing how I was feeling. We didn't go at first to the demonstrations. I wrote anti-war songs and actually performed one at a coffee house at Columbia one evening in the winter of 1967. And then on April 15th, 1967, Bruce and I decided we would come out of our shell a bit, awkward as it was as some people who were second lieutenants, not yet on active duty. We participated in a large demonstration in Central Park against the war. There were 200,000 people in attendance. And we were shouting, "This is a picture of that demonstration." It was taken, there's a picture in the New York Times archive that was used in an article that appeared there. I'm not in this, but these people could stand in for me. I didn't look too different at the time. And we were shouting, "Peace now, peace now." We marched down Fifth Avenue. It was quite an exhilarating experience. That was April 15th, 1967. Scroll forward to April 21st, 1971, and there I am in the center with a red beard, natty blue suit, red tie, and I'm holding a rose in front of an array of photographers and press people and several hundred onlookers at the Vietnam Veterans Encampment against the war on the Capitol grounds there. And I was just about, or maybe I'm in the middle of saying to the audience how sorry I was that we had caused so much harm to our brothers and sisters in Vietnam. Okay, so that brackets a 4-year period. You would think that one thing logically led to the other, but it didn't, not at all. The next 4 years were a very turbulent time for me, wrenching in some respects, scary, depressing, and exhilarating, alternatively. And that's what I want to tell you some stories about. I entered on active duty in the fall of 1967, and I was assigned to Vietnam on Lincoln's birthday, February 12, 1968, after having originally been assigned to Korea. That was a pretty big shock when I got those orders. And ironically, also, Bruce got orders to Vietnam as well. I arrived in Saigon with 21 other lieutenants who had been training first to do background investigations in Korea and then to do operations as advisors in Vietnam on May 13th, 1968, which coincided with the beginning of the Paris peace talks that Lyndon Johnson had agreed to. And they started, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese launched an offensive at the time to commemorate this event. And when I stepped off the plane along with my lieutenant buddies, we were stepping into a country at war and a city at war. We went to a place called Copeland Compound in the center of the city where we were to receive some orientation, learn about our assignments, and where we were going to go. The assignment we were given, we were all going to be district advisors, intelligence advisors to the local and regional forces of the district. A district was like a county within the province, which was like a state. And I was going to advisory team 43 in Hao Nia province, which was midway between Saigon and the Cambodian border. The job we had was to be district DIOC advisors. DIOC stood for District Intelligence Operations and Coordinating Center. And our job was to put together, to actually build, if necessary, an office where we would bring all the intelligence of the Vietnamese agencies that gathered intelligence. There were about a dozen of them, civilian and military, to gather that intelligence, translate it, and then distribute it to American and Vietnamese military units for use in fighting the Viet Cong. We were also going to be Phoenix advisors. The Phoenix program was a secret. It actually wasn't so secret. There was an article about it in the spring of 1968 in Newsweek. But it was a secret program developed by the CIA to target and eliminate the Viet Cong political infrastructure in the villages and towns of Vietnam. The idea was to neutralize these people because they were the lifeline of the Viet Cong. They collected taxes to support them. They provided supplies, medical equipment. They collected taxes and recruited people. Sometimes we thought they were being kidnapped, but they would have said recruited. So our job as district Phoenix advisors was to give direction to a group called the PRU, the Provincial Reconnaissance Units, which were basically a squad, about 15 men. They were mercenaries. They were drawn from people who had been kicked out of the military and were former convicts. So it was a rather unsavory group, but they were being recruited to snatch people out of the district villages, if they could, turn them to our side, or if necessary, to eliminate them. And our job was to advise them. But I was in Saigon, I was so focused on how safe I was going to be, where I was going to be located. It really didn't sink into me at first what this really would involve. But by the time I got to Kuchi, which was in the center of Hao Nia province, this is a picture that I took on the way to Kuchi. In the center, where the roads come together in the middle, right to the left where the arrow is, you see that was the compound of the district chief, and the local forces were there, all the district offices were there, and the advisors, the team of advisors, my team, which consisted of 7 people, a major who was the chief, the district chief advisor, an operations officer who was a captain, myself, the first lieutenant at the time, the intelligence officer. There were some sergeants and an RTO, a radio telegraph officer. And so I arrived in Kuchi, and above there in the picture toward the horizon is the United States, the U.S. 25th Infantry Division base camp, which there were 15,000 men there. There was an airfield, there were helicopters, there were tanks. It was a huge operation. It was about 2 miles up the road from us. And it was thought that that Kuchi would be a very good place to do intelligence. And I had first been assigned to a place called Duc Way, which was near the Cambodian border. But when the colonel, who was the head of the provincial advisory team, saw that I was a lawyer, he decided to switch me and put me at Kuchi, where there'd be more intelligence to do. So anyway, I arrived in Kuchi, And Kuchi was kind of a mess. They had been attacked during Tet, which was a major offensive at the beginning of February, launched by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, in every town and city of Vietnam, and tens of thousands of people were killed in this offensive, which really was a turning point in the American people's support for the Vietnam War. And then but what happened in Kuchi at that time was the compound was overrun by the Viet Cong, and the advisor's house was burned to the ground. The district senior advisor and his RTO had been killed in an ambush. And in May, as I mentioned, I got there on the 13th. To coincide with that, there was an attack in Kuchi, and the Viet Cong had taken over the National Police headquarters across the street from our compound. And it took jet fighters from the US Air Force to dislodge them. So that was just 2 weeks before I got there. So when I arrived, the place was really in disarray. The people were in a very defensive posture. People were talking about attacks every night, and it didn't seem quite so safe. And so my job, of course, was to be the DIOC advisor and be the Phoenix advisor. So I started exploring, trying to find people who I'm supposed to interact with. And I found that there was no DIOC there. There was actually no intelligence actually being collected in the Vietnamese. They called him an S2. I met this second lieutenant there, the Trung Huy, and he had no files. He had no records. And I set about to try to talk to them about the National Police and the other Vietnamese intelligence agencies about collecting intelligence and getting it to me. I had plans to build a building, which was going to be called the DIOC. And I'll show you a picture of that. It's picture 4, actually. That what didn't exist when I got there, it was something I eventually had built. I also got to know the Provincial Reconnaissance Unit people, the PRU, that were that I was tasked to be their not their leader, but to give them assignments to go out and catch Viet Cong infrastructure people. At that point, after I met this fellow, the leader, it sank in just what I was being tasked to do, which was to go out on snatch operations with these mercenaries to capture civilians in the villages who were suspected of being the political arm of the Viet Cong. This was something that was quite difficult for me to digest. But there was something came to mind because I was having trouble starting my intelligence collection operation with the agencies that I was assigned to liaison with. I had an idea, which was to convert this unit into semi-clandestine intelligence cells to go out into the villages to collect intelligence every day. So I created, instead of this combat reaction unit, I turned them into collection cells, 2-man collection cells. And they produced a lot of intelligence. I had up to about 30 intelligence reports a week. And this was way before I could get any intelligence from the other Vietnamese agencies. And so we started actually on a good note. And the colonel, who is the province senior advisor, found out what I was doing. Just as an aside, what I was doing was not authorized. This was not part of what I was supposed to be doing. I'd converted these combat people into intelligence collectors, but yet Colonel Bernard, who was the senior advisor at the province level, was so impressed, he decided, he came by one day and he said, let's go, I would like to take you to Saigon to meet some people. And I would like you to bring your briefing book and tell them about what you're doing. So the next day we got down to Saigon in the center of the city, the most leafy part of the city. with these fancy French villas right next to the presidential palace. And I proceeded to brief a number of people. The first person I briefed was a man named, was a colonel named William Greenwald. I didn't know what his job was. Later, when I started writing my memoir, I found out that he was the national head of the Phoenix program, but I didn't know that at the time. So I briefed him with what I was doing. When I finished that, he didn't have any comments. And Colonel Bernard and I went off to a second meeting. On the way, we bumped into a colonel, somebody named William Reddle, whom he knew. And Colonel Bernard invited him to lunch with us. I briefed, we went to another beautiful villa, and I briefed a second person, a fellow stocky person with gray slacks and a white open collar shirt. And he sat on his couch, and I sat on the chair, and I opened my book, and he seemed very impressed. He said, by then I actually was a captain. He said, "Captain Johnson, I bet you should be congratulated. I bet you're up for major very soon." I just received my second bar to be a captain, so I didn't say anything. But at lunch, Colonel Reddle was there, and we had a discussion about who should control the PRU. I did not know at the time that Colonel Reddle was actually not a Marine colonel at all. He was a member of the CIA, and he was the national head of the PRU. And we had a very interesting discussion. I thought this fellow was very good looking, looked a little like Kirk Douglas. Also, I thought, boy, this guy is really sharp. He has really good questions. And it was funny in retrospect because I didn't know he was the head of the PRU nationally. Anyway, on the way back from Saigon in the Jeep with Colonel Bernard to Kuchi, we talked about the meeting, and he apparently had a discussion with Colonel Reddle about who should control the PRU, and we continued that discussion. He felt that the people in Saigon didn't know what was going on in the countryside, and that in Saigon they had thought that it should be the CIA that maintained control, or at least the military, U.S. military, and he didn't think that they understood the way in which that offended the province chief and the district chief, and that it just wouldn't work. In any case, I got back, and around that time, a lot of higher up people in the U.S. military establishment and also the civilian establishment started visiting me. Apparently, the word had gotten out that Kuchi was a good place to find out what was happening in the war. It was also only an hour's ride or an hour and a half's ride from Saigon, so they could easily come out to the boonies and then get back safely at night to Saigon after getting briefed. And I had visits from all kinds of people, important people, 1, 2, and 3-star generals. I had a visit from a staff person, a 2 or 3-star, 2-star general, General Dupuy, who was a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I started feeling very important and enjoying myself. And here is a picture. It was taken before I became a captain, but you can see it's a picture of me looking happy. I was pretty happy, not something that I expected. And I know I was happy because I got a tape from my mother. We exchanged tapes instead of letters. And in the tape, she said, "George, I really expected you to sound lonely and depressed, but you really sound happy." So I know I was happy because my mother told me. So my work with the PRU continued, and eventually, doing so well with getting the intelligence, one thing led to another, and I found myself drawn into these reaction operations, snatch operations that the PRU and other organizations who had gotten intelligence led to. And there are two that I would like to tell you about. This would be a story about me and the PRU. One day, the head of the PRU found two teenagers outside of the school who should have been in school, and he went over to them and interrogated them and searched them and found a hand grenade taped to the leg of one of them. And on interrogation, this fellow said that the VC had recruited them to throw hand grenades in the marketplaces of the different villages. And on interrogation, he identified some other teenagers who had been recruited to do the same thing. So the head of the PRU asked me to drive the PRU into the village, which was nearby the district compound, and to try to capture these folks, these teenagers. And so we jumped into my Jeep. There were the two teenagers, and I was there. I didn't have an interpreter, but there were about a half a dozen PRU people somehow fit into the Jeep. We raced into the village, and they jumped out, and they went into one of the houses nearby and came out with two more prisoners who apparently were these people they were looking for, and a hand grenade. And the two men were bound, blindfolded, and the PRU guy put them in the back seat of the Jeep and told me with hand motions, because we couldn't really communicate, that I should guard them while they went on trying to find the other teenagers. And I was standing there, guarding them with my M16 rifle. And it occurred to me, what happens if they run? Could I shoot them? Stop? How would I stop them? How would it look if I didn't shoot them? And I started thinking to myself, please don't run. Please don't run. A few minutes later, however, the PRU came back, and I breathed a sigh of relief. And the first thing they did was they demolished the house where they had found the hand grenade. And we had the two teenagers who had helped them, and the two boys who were captured in that house. And all of us somehow piled back into the Jeep and went back to the district compound, where the four Vietnamese were put in jail. This was interesting, because were these combatants? Were they civilians? I didn't know. It would be hard to say. There was also a second incident that I was going to tell you about that involved, this was an intelligence officer at the base camp who had a source. And because I'm not sure I'm going to have time to finish if I don't truncate this story. But the short of it is we went into the village with this source that this fellow had, because he said he could identify two VCI infrastructure people. One of them was a animal husbandry official. So we went down to Tan Phu Trung, where he said these people were, and we jumped. I jumped out of my Jeep also. The military people went in with the national police that I had gotten to help, and they went into this house, and suddenly there's a lot of screaming and commotion, and the police are coming out with this old lady who's screaming and being dragged out. And when the relatives of this woman realize that she's being taken away, they start screaming and pointing and yelling, and it was chaos. And the police proceeded to take her away, and that's who they found. And then the operation was over. They drove back. And that night, during Radio Watch, I had the chance to think about what I was doing that day. And I found it disconcerting and troubling. I thought of, the history of the Jews who experienced just such roundups for hundreds of years in Europe. And there I was with this Jewish second lieutenant from the 25th. He was actually from South Africa, but he was attached to the 25th Infantry Division. And there were the two of us rounding up these people. I thought to myself, I'm doing my job, I'm doing my mission, but what's the price I'm paying? So that's the end of that story. There was another, my next story is about coordinate search operations. Coordinate search operations technically were sealing off of a Vietnamese village so that during the middle of the night and preventing them from leaving. And then in the morning at dawn, bringing in Vietnamese troops or intelligence people, national police, to search, to round up the people from their houses and to interrogate everybody to find out who was the VC. Now this was or VCI, the VC infrastructure, political infrastructure. This was a tactic that might work if in a VC controlled area, but it wasn't a tactic that worked where I was, which was a nominally controlled, government controlled area. And for the entire time I was in Kuchi, which was a year, we never found a VC guerrilla or a VC political infrastructure person in any of these. And I did dozens of these operations at that time. Mike, can you put up, I think it's pictures 6 and 7. I have some pictures of what these operations look like. First picture shows this is a village and this is the marketplace in that village. I forget which village, it might have been Phu Kip village, where you see two people are coming forward to be interrogated. And the rest of the people are standing around. This was really a tactic which I found to be of questionable utility, because not only was it not effective in finding Viet Cong guerrillas or infrastructure, it actually really hurt the pacification program, which was supposed to be winning over the hearts and minds of the population. I couldn't think of a worse way to do that, because what we were doing was rousting people out of their homes, preventing them from leaving, making them sit in the sun all day. They couldn't go out to the market. They couldn't go out to their fields if they were farmers. The school children couldn't study. And they were, in a way, terrorized by this operation. And when we, could you put the next picture, picture 7? So this is one way it was done. In this particular situation, there was a source, a Viet Cong, somebody we called a Chu Hoi, who turned to our side, who was inside the armored vehicle trying to identify people as they were paraded in front. We told them they were being photographed for an ID. But what was going on was people were being identified or not as Viet Cong or Viet Cong infrastructure. But as I said, this never worked. So it alienated the population, but it also alienated, because of the repetition, this became a key thing that, a tactic that American military units were engaged in after the Nixon administration came, not the administration, but after the election of Richard Nixon in the fall of in November of 1968. This became a central part of the Hamlet pacification program that we conduct these operations, and we're doing them every week, and every commander was coming up to me for advice about how to find, how to run these operations and to ask for Vietnamese troop support. And I was doing this every week. And the result was that the district chief and the Vietnamese people, the province chief, the district chief, and the people under them, they didn't think this was a good idea. They were fed up with it. And they, because these were people they were trying to get the allegiance of. It was their people, and we were treating them. What we were doing was we were rounding them up and imprisoning them for a day or more. This was not something that they appreciated. And on a couple of occasions, which I won't go into the details with, which the province chief and the district chief actually sabotaged the operations by not showing up. Or one time, the province chief came the night before the search was to be done, the night that the seal was to be put in place, and had a kind of a meet and greet with the village people, handing out candy to the children, knowing that the Viet Cong, if they were there, they would leave, and basically disrupting and assuring that the operation would be a failure. So there was a lot of tension and animosity that was generated by these operations among our friends, the government people we were supposed to be advising and supporting. And basically, it didn't work. So you may be asking, where does the Jewish angle come in here? And the answer is, I didn't become a Baal Teshuvah during my period in Vietnam. I didn't suddenly turn to Jewishness. It was a very subtle thing that was going on, and it wasn't just my Jewish identity that was entering into. It was actually two factors. One was the disruption of my moral center. I had come to the Army thinking that serving in the military was not different from doing the right thing. And my experience in Vietnam really made me question not only I came there opposed to the war, but what I was doing just seems morally suspect. But in addition to that, I was watching what was happening in the States during this period, 1968. And in 1968, it seemed to me from afar that the world in America was just, the country was coming apart. Just before I left, Martin Luther King was assassinated, April 4th. And on June 5th, I think it was, I was in country about 3 weeks. Robert Kennedy was assassinated after winning the California presidential primary, Democratic presidential primary. And then in August, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, there were riots and chaos at that convention. And it seemed to me that the America I had left was changed, and that the violence in Vietnam had somehow come home to America. And my faith in American exceptionalism was really on trial. I wouldn't say that I changed materially at the time. It didn't change anything I did, but it was in the background. And about that time, in the summer of 1968, I was coming back from a meeting at the intelligence center at the Kuchi base camp, and I noticed, I went by the chapel, and I noticed this huge blue flag with a white Jewish star. And I was really astounded. This is a picture of the chapel. You can't see the flag. And this is it's actually 9 people. If you count me, I'm the 10th man. There was this, I walked in and I found this fellow who was an officer, and I think it was this guy in the center where the arrow is. And he was an officer. I think this fellow was a psychiatrist. And I talked to him, and he said, we have Jewish services Friday night and Saturday morning. And I said, well, I won't be able to come Friday night because they won't let me out of the compound and the security situation, and my nighttime radio watch responsibilities won't let me, but I'll come on Saturday. And I started doing that. And I found it a kind of a retreat from the war. And really got a sense of peace when I was doing at services there that was really, in a way, beautiful. I got a sense of the holy in the middle of this very profane world that I was in. And that struck home even more a few weeks later when I was getting ready on a Saturday morning. It was around 9 o'clock. And I was starting to get in my Jeep, and this fellow Vietnamese soldier came out of the intelligence center, and he was motioning me to come with him into the village outside the gate. So I followed him into Tan Tong village hamlet, which was right next to the compound. And he led me to a mud and thatched roofed hut. There were a bunch of people milling around outside, and we went into the house, and there in front of me were these two dead bodies. It was a man and a woman. And they had been shot in the head and in the genitals. And there was a note that was pinned to the man. The two of them were lying in a sexual position. And there was a note that had been pinned to them. And in Vietnamese, I was told it said, this is a judgment of execution by the Viet Cong tribunal. And this is what happens to traitors. It turned out, I was told that these people, the man had been a Chu Hoi, had come over from the VC to our side. And this is what happened as a retribution for that from the VC. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I left, went back to the compound. I telephoned in reports to the people at the base camp, and I reported it to the Vietnamese. And then I got back in my Jeep and drove up to the chapel. When I got up to the chapel, I found these people, the congregation, the soldiers milling around. And I asked what was going on, and they said, well, we don't have a minion, and we don't have anybody to lead services. And I said, well, I can do that, and I can make a minion. So I went to the front, I put on a tallis, I took the prayer book and the kippah, and I led services. And I picked my favorite prayers, melodies, and I said Kaddish for the GIs who had been killed. And I thought, how am I able to do this? I just left this gruesome scene. If there was ever a profane scene, it was these two murdered Vietnamese in that hut. And here I was praying to God, feeling in this holy space. How am I able to separate these two worlds? I didn't have an answer. But this sense of the holy and the profane and the moral and the immoral was somewhere in my psyche. And it was troubling. But what happened was I realized that I was not only doing this between the holy and the profane, or segmenting myself from what was going on, but I was doing that outside the chapel. I was doing that in my everyday life. I was living with the Vietnamese every day. This is the next picture with the two children. I was living with the Vietnamese. I saw every aspect of their lives. Here you see two children that were children of the regional force people who were living in those ramshackle houses behind on the compound. I saw every aspect of their lives. I saw women breastfeeding their babies. I saw people bathing at the well using the bucket, which I used also in the beginning. Children going to school, children playing in the yards, and people like those two in front of you. I saw every aspect of life. I also saw the morgue. I tried not to see it. The morgue for the soldiers who were killed in operations, which was happening on a daily basis was right outside of our washroom. And I could see, if I wanted to, through the screen window, the women wailing over the coffins of these soldiers. And there was incense in it, but I didn't. I shut it all out. I really tried not to experience that part of what I was actually facing, trying to lock away the war in some sense and keep going. It was kind of like a moral anesthesia that I was experiencing. Okay, so now I'd like to switch to the last two stories, which are stories about after I left Vietnam. I arrived back in the States in May, and I had 3 more months of service, and I fulfilled that obligation also at Fort Holabird at the Intelligence Command. But there was really no one who wanted to talk about Vietnam there, because we had all been there. And when I was home, nobody wanted to talk about it, and I didn't want to talk about it. So I just kind of picked up where I left off. When I finished a few weeks at home, after I finished my service and I went on a vacation, I started a job in Washington with the Treasury Department, which I had gotten to the Office of International Affairs through a very good recommendation from one of my Columbia law professors. And I just kind of like forgot about Vietnam and put it behind me. And I had a girlfriend, and I was just more concerned with my love life and succeeding as a government lawyer, pretending I really never had been in Vietnam. And all that was fine and good for about 6 months. But then May 1970 happened. On the Friday, I think it was, there was news that Nixon had invaded Cambodia. And to me, that was an egregious breach of his promise to end the war. It seemed like he was expanding the war in Vietnam. And this was something I was very disturbed by. And then on Sunday, I was invited to a Jewish wedding on Long Island, which I went to. And I had this idealized view of what I would be seeing. I was looking for a traditional Jewish wedding with all the Jewish rituals and the beauty that I imagined. And it didn't turn out that way. There was very little that I found to be traditional about the wedding. It was mainly just a party. And I didn't say it to anybody, but I went away thinking, if this is what American Jewish life has become, when the most sacred thing is a wedding, then I have to do something to change it. And I went back to Washington. But on Monday was May 4th. May 4th was the day of the Kent State killings. You may remember, or you may have seen the picture that sums up the day, this teenage girl kneeling in front of the dead student's body, screaming with her hands upraised. It was a day I'm emotional even now. It was a day that changed my life. Everything that I had kept inside came pouring out. I could no longer keep my equilibrium, my forgetting about the war, and I realized I had to get involved. I looked to get involved. I actually found a Jewish group in Washington called Jews for Urban Justice, which was an anti-war group and a social action group that was trying to eliminate housing discrimination in the Washington area with Jewish landlords. And I found this to be something that I never imagined existed. Here were some young Jews in their 20s and 30s who were connecting being Jewish with politics and social action. It wasn't something that never occurred to me before. And I was fascinated and intrigued, and I became active in the group. I participated in anti-war demonstrations. I wrote letters to the editor. I helped plant a tree of peace on the Capitol lawn. We were stopped by the Capitol Police, but we actually were able to go back when Senator Gravel from Alaska passed a resolution authoring us to plant the tree. But I spoke at 2 college anti-war protests in New York City during November, one at Adelphi University and one at John Jay Police Academy College. And I started growing a beard, a red beard. And as the beard got longer, my discomfort with working at the Treasury got more uncomfortable. And as the months went on, it actually took a whole year for me to come to the point where I felt like I could no longer work in the government. I was actually right across the street from Richard Nixon. I was right across the Treasury Department, is right across, at least the main Treasury building is right across the street from the White House. And I found working for Richard Nixon and his administration intolerable and unconscionable. And I was in a situation where I actually had a choice. It wasn't like I was in the Army anymore. If I wanted to get out, I could. And I decided, I have to get out of this. I had one foot in the anti-war movement and one foot in the Treasury Department. It didn't make sense to me. And it took a long time. It took a whole year, actually, from May 1970 to May 1971. Finally, I got up the courage and I walked into my boss's office. It was a palatial office. He was the Assistant General Counsel for International Affairs. He had one office window looking over to the Washington Monument down the mall, and the other one down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. And I actually couldn't really tell him, I couldn't get out why I actually wanted to quit. But I told him I was leaving the Treasury at the end of the month to write my memoir and that I was moving to the country. And that's what I did. And I got the words out that I was quitting. And with those words, I essentially cut the cord of success that I had so diligently woven since I was 5 years old. It was the hardest thing I ever did. When my parents found out, my father broke down crying. But as wrenching as it was liberating for me. I wanted to change my life. I wanted to make my Jewishness the center of it. And in fact, I rented a farm with 200 acres in the Shenandoah Valley in the foothills of the Blue Ridge for the summer. And I went out there and I started writing my memoir, the first draft anyway. And I started composing songs. I composed a melody for Yigdal. This was almost 50 years ago. And I hosted the retreats for this counterculture chavurah that I joined and I helped found called Verbringen, which still exists actually. I decided that I wanted to go to Israel and learn Hebrew and see what a holistic Jewish life was like. So I picked an Orthodox kibbutz. I lived there for 5 months. And then I came back, and after a short time working for Ralph Nader, a perfect job fell into my lap. It was to be research director of a new Jewish think tank called the Institute for Jewish Policy Planning and Research, where I was able to explore all the things I wanted to do, which was to change American Jewish life. And over the next 5 years, I wrote dozens of articles and maybe about 15 or more policy papers for the Institute about how American Jewish life was changing. And Judaism became the center of my life. And I joined a study group eventually that I'm still part of almost 50 years later, and raised a Jewish family. I married an Israeli, not that I met on the kibbutz, but whom I met actually in Washington, my dear wife Aya, and raised 2 Jewish boys. Now I have 3 grandsons, and it was just a new phase in my life. I had a new beginning. The last story I'd like to tell you, I think I've probably taken almost an hour, but I think I'll take a few moments to tell you about my last story, which was a trip back to Vietnam in 2016, which I arranged with my friend Bruce, that I had gone to law school and has been a dear friend of mine, a close friend, for 60 years now. I met him freshman year in college. And we arranged this trip. I had my objective and he had his objective. His objective was to raise money and distribute it to orphanages and children who had been affected by the war. And I joined him and I helped him raise money. And we did that. What I wanted to do was I wanted to go back to Kuchi. I wanted to see the town. I also wanted to see if I could meet a guerrilla who had been hiding in the tunnels that I had not been able to find those many years ago. And I had an opportunity to do so because the trip was arranged by a Vietnamese agency, and the woman who was heading it was able to arrange a private meeting between our group of 4. It was Bruce and I and our wives at the Kuchi tourist site. And we went to Kuchi first, and then we arrived at this tunnel tourist site. And you can see here that we met this former guerrilla. He actually was born and raised in Tan Phu Trung village, where I had done more than one coordinated search operation, and that snatch operation that I was referring to. He had been born there. And Tan Phu Trung, if you look to the left, right just below where the pointer is, the green, that looks like a battleship over a green area there, in this just to the left of center, that was Tan Phu Trung village, where this man was from. Mr. Nam was his name. And we stood there in front of this big map of Kuchi at the time. There are 3 things I wanted to know. I wanted to know where the tunnels were in Kuchi. Were they in fact under the villages, which the American commanders had asserted, but we didn't believe? Second question was, where were the fighting age young men of the village, which we didn't know? And third, were there tunnels under the Kuchi base camp? Now, if you look in the center where there's a blue area right in the center of the map, that was the Kuchi base camp. And that red area above, the pink area above there, that was called the Hobo Woods. And you can see all the black lines. That was the tunnel complex in that area. That's where we were at that time when I was meeting Mr. Nam. And that, even though we didn't know it at the time, was the headquarters of the Viet Cong government, the COSVIN, the Central Office of South Vietnam, the National Liberation Front. We actually didn't know that the Viet Cong headquarters was sitting right next to Kuchi base camp and in Kuchi district. We didn't know. It was revealed in 1975 in a New York Times article. Anyway, so I proceeded to ask my questions of Mr. Nam. And he said, yes, there were, in fact, tunnels under each of the villages in Kuchi. The first one was, in fact, in his village. It was started in Tan Phu Trung in 1947 when they started building bunkers as bomb shelters against the French. And they were expanded over the years, although there were tunnels under each village. They weren't connected for security reasons. And he said what happened was that the fighting age people from the village, they lived in that pink area where we were in 2016 at the tourist site. The guerrilla-aged young people were, the fighting-age people were actually in the tunnels in that area, and they came home at night periodically to the villages of Kuchi for supplies, and then they would leave. And when we did our coordinated search operations, they were able to get out if they wanted, because there were tunnel entrances in each of the houses of the residents. And in fact, that was why we never found them. It wasn't for trying. We searched, and we never found any of the tunnel entrances. And lastly, it turned out that when Kuchi base camp was built in 1966, it was built on top of two tunnel complexes. And in fact, one was directly under the camp headquarters, and the tunnels were so close to the surface that the Viet Cong were able to eavesdrop on the command headquarters and used it to run to attack the camp in February at great cost in American lives and material. After this, we went to lunch. The next picture, please. On the Saigon River, and we proceeded to talk more informally with Mr. Nam. And he told us about the Viet Cong's perspective on the war. And one thing he said that was very telling, and he said, America want to fight quick. Viet Cong want to fight slow. And as the lunch wound up, I realized why I was there. Had come to Vietnam to seek some kind of reconciliation with this soldier that I had been looking for all those many years ago, and to make peace, and maybe to get some peace myself. I hesitated, but as we were leaving, I said to him, I want to apologize to you for all the damage I did to your people. And he looked at me and he said, it wasn't your fault. It was it was the American government. You were only doing your job. So, Mike, do you want to see if there are any questions?
Yeah, thank you, George. There's been a lot of discussion and some questions in the chat already, and I would encourage everyone to continue to use the chat to ask questions. We have our museum president on here, Michael Berman. Mike, did you want to say something?
Yeah, George, thank you so very much. And I gather we have over 100 participants on the chat room in this seminar. It was really interesting to know that what you did and how you faced what you did, and then going back. I know so many people who go back, and as they say, they peel a bit of the skin off the onion. Still very tough. And really a lot of conflicts within their own minds still. Did they do the right thing? How did they handle some of the things they did do? Any number of them had some 8, 9, 10-year-old approached them with a hand grenade and the pin pulled and had to either shoot the kid or die themselves. How do you handle that conflict? So I thank you very much for that. And I gather we have like 67 in the chats. So I'm going to shut up and let the others speak. So thank you again. We look forward to hearing from you in the future and the other seminars that Mike has put together. So
Thank you.
one more time, thank you very much.
Yes, we could go to a couple of the questions that were asked in the chat early on in the talk. The question about the protests in the 60s, Vietnam protests in the 60s, and whether you felt they were mostly against the draft rather than the conflict or the undeclared war at that time itself.
I think it was the draft. The draft was a motivator. I don't think they were protesting the draft directly. I think they were protesting what was going on in Vietnam. After all, 3 million Vietnamese died in that war. 2 million civilians. There was a lot of harm that was done. And the question was that a necessary war? So I think the demonstrations were against the war. I think that the draft motivated them because they were exposed and it got their attention.
I'm going to try to combine a few of these. There's a couple of things. Did you consider resigning your commission at any point? And did you think of it as a hypocrisy to continue to do your assigned duty when you felt it was immoral?
Well, that's a great question. It's certainly a probing question. Thank you for it. The answer is no, I didn't. Because once I got to Vietnam and I was fighting for my life, there were people out there every day trying to kill me. They had told me in the training program in Saigon that I was going to be a target. So even in the beginning, that hits home. You feel like when I would walk out of the compound, I would try to do it very nonchalantly. When I would even go across the street to the National Police building, I was petrified, and I tried to look quite relaxed. But I felt like I was under attack myself, and as a result, the Viet Cong had become my enemy. Even though I was against the war, my survival instinct got the best of my moral instincts, put it that way. And even though I knew the war had no good moral or political basis, and it was compromising, I still was fighting for my life. And no, it never resigning my commission never occurred to me.
Bruce Mendelson asks, what advice would you give your grandchildren should they express a desire to join the U.S. Armed Forces?
That's a great question also. I believe, I really believe in America. I still believe in it's very difficult at this time, but I believe in American exceptionalism. I believe that we can be better than the Vietnam War showed us to be, and we can be better than some aspects of our life is today. And I would hope that when my grandchildren, I have 3 grandsons right now, feel very lucky. A 3-year-old, 6-year-old, and a 2-month-old. That when it becomes time for them, if they want to go into military service, that they would be proud to serve in the American military.
There's a lot of discussion about anti-Semitism in the military. Did you experience any?
Actually, no. I mean, there were subtle jabs that I would get but I wouldn't call it anti-Semitism. There was one interesting kind of somewhat humorous, ironic event that occurred. We actually had no attacks on Kuchi, even though there had been attacks on Kuchi district and the compound during Tet, and only 2 weeks before I got there. There really was no attack during the year I was there, except there were two or three. The first one came on the first night of Rosh Hashanah in September. And I just happened to be at the 1st Infantry Division's base camp for services that night. And when I returned the next day, the sergeants, I got a Jeep ride back to the compound. And I was greeted by one or two of the sergeants. And they started kidding me. They said, "George, you knew." I said, "I knew what?" I said, "You knew that we were going to be attacked and you left." So I said, "Well, what happened?" He says, "Well, a mortar round fell and shrapnel was sprayed throughout the advisor's house, through the pots and pans. It was mainly in the kitchen area, and all the pots and pans had shrapnel." And they said, "Well, when Christmas comes, you're going to be on duty." But that's the closest I got to anything that had to do with my Judaism.
There's a comment from Carl Singer. May 4th, 1970 was the day that I entered the service from Cleveland, Ohio. So many Kent State students at the airport as I was heading to Fort Campbell.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said. May 4th was the day she did what?
Carl Singer comments that May 4th, 1970 was the day he entered the service. And he saw, he was in Cleveland, Ohio, and saw Kent State students at the airport as he was heading to Fort Campbell.
And does he have a question?
No, just a comment that that May 4th.
Yeah, it was a day that will last in many people's minds.
So the question is, do you recommend taking a trip back to Vietnam?
Yes, most definitely. If you're asking whether I recommended veterans, Vietnam veterans, go back to Vietnam. Yes, definitely. I think that seeing what's happened to Vietnam is heartening. You know, they have a communist government and there isn't a whole lot of freedom as we know it there, but it's at peace. It's recovered. You know, I didn't get a chance to say what it looked like in Kuchi, but there's no sign of the war at all. There are all these new buildings and people are going about their lives in peace. And I think it's consoling to go back there and to see how resilient the Vietnamese people are. And secondly, how little animosity there is, even among people like Mr. Nam, who lost his arm fighting the American army. Toward Americans, we were greeted with open hearts and open arms. And I think those people there are ready to be our friends. And I think we should be too.
George, this is Phil Sternberg. I have a question to ask you. Why is it, in your opinion, that we haven't learned from our mistakes, it seems, over the years?
I don't know. I marvel at the same thing, Phil. I see the same thing happening over and over. I see, in Afghanistan, maybe there was a good reason to go initially to try to find Osama bin Laden and so forth. But these are impossible situations. There's no way that a foreign army can penetrate the culture and through military operations change society in the direction in which the people of that society, even if there's fighting, it's very, very difficult for us to intervene in other people's battles. And I always felt, with respect to Vietnam, and I see that happening again, that we're trying to remake the world in our image is a fool's errand.
Do you think maybe there's a little bit of greed involved in this, a little bit of money, the fact that, it was financial interests that kept us going in this thing? A lot of people, a lot of big companies were involved, and our government is just so tied to them. I mean, beware the military-industrial complex, Eisenhower's comment.
Yeah. There, I don't know how many billions, tens of, or hundreds of billions of dollars were spent fighting the war in Vietnam. And you have a point. Once it gets going, it's hard to turn off. But there were many years we were in Vietnam in which the president of the United States resisted what Lyndon Johnson did. We actually funded, I don't know how many people realize this, but the American government funded the French Indo-Chinese War. If it hadn't been for American money, the French would have collapsed long before Dien Bien Phu. And if we had resisted that, this pit of sending soldiers there to fight in battles and trying to change the politics of that country, and somehow resisted sending troops, I think we could have avoided this huge buildup of the military-industrial complex. And I think that the fact is we have these material, we have these fighters, we have these vehicles, we have these troops, and we can use them if we need them, but we also can use them for in wars that perhaps we shouldn't be in. I guess I really can't say more than that. I think that wasn't the reason we got into Vietnam, but it certainly gave it momentum once we got there.
George, I have a two-part question. First of all, I'm enjoying your presentation and I appreciate it. My first question is, Vietnam would like compensation from us for Agent Orange, and I'd like to hear your views about that. The second question is, should we be more vigorous about disabling landmines?
Let me take the first question first. I really didn't understand your question about Agent Orange. Would you repeat it, please?
Well, a lot of Vietnamese have suffered from Agent Orange, just like American soldiers have. And Vietnam, the government thinks that they deserve compensation from the U.S. I mean, I agree with the Vietnam government myself.
Yeah. And we haven't offered any compensation?
I don't really know anything beyond that.
Well, I think so. Just like American soldiers who were impacted by Agent Orange should get, and I think are getting, help with medical treatment. I think that this is something that should be on the table if it isn't. And the second question, again?
There's still a lot of landmines in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And I really don't know what role the U.S. is playing to try to locate them and neutralize them. Um, but, you know, we can probably always do more because there are probably many, many, many thousands of them.
I'll defer to people who know more. I really don't
Okay.
know what's going on. If there's somebody else attending here today who knows, that would be great to hear that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're just about running out of time. There's a question about, do you know what happened to the Vietnamese that you worked with after the war?
Excellent question. And when I went back to Kuchi, I was kind of hoping that I would bump into somebody who was old enough to remember somebody that I knew. But I didn't. I think Mr. Nam knew Major San, who was the district chief, and of course he knew people who lived in Kuchi at the time. But I know a little bit about Major San and Colonel Nan, who was the province chief, and I know a little bit about Carl Bernard, who was the lieutenant colonel, who was the province senior advisor, and a bunch of other people I dealt with. Ellis Williamson, the commanding general of the 25th Infantry Division.
Cool.
I did research for my book.
Eric, Trixie, not mommy.
But I know that Major San became colonel. I think he became province chief. Colonel Nan, who was a very controversial character, and I think he eventually was removed. But other than that, I wasn't able to find people who knew people. And actually, one reason was we went the wrong way on our way to Kuchi, and we only had a few minutes to be there, so I really didn't have too much time to explore it. So,
I have something really interesting I'd like to share. According to the Discovery Channel, they have these top 10s, top 10 tanks, top 10 fighter aircraft. The number 2 general was Zhukov, if I'm pronouncing it right, the Russian general during World War II.
yeah, Zhukov. Yeah, he was the commanding general in World War II.
And the number 1 general is
Washington?
Giap. General Giap.
Giap. The head of the North Vietnamese army.
Right. He was voted number 1.
Interesting. Better than George Washington even. Well, I think that's interesting. You know, I've done a lot of reading about, and when we went back to North Vietnam, we were back in Vietnam, and learned from the museums that we visited about who was really in control and how ruthless and how many lives they were willing to sacrifice. There was no end of the carnage that they were willing to have in order to drive the Americans out. It was a brutal war, and the Vietnamese won. The North Vietnamese won because they were just a lot more brutal and willing to sacrifice more lives than we were. And I don't know if you could say rightly so or not, but the value that they placed on life was, I don't know, you could question it.
Based on everything you said, do you go down to the wall in DC?
Well, every year would be, I always went. I haven't been there since the pandemic, but I go every year on Veterans Day. And I attend the ceremonies. Two of my friends are on the wall. One was a law classmate of mine, and one was a fraternity brother at Cornell. And the doctor from Cornell was Richard Aaron. He's one of the first names in the list in the booklet that they have there. And the other was Bob Ahern, I think his name was. Ahern was his last name. And I know how Bob Ahern was killed. He led the dog teams, scout teams, and he died in his sleep. A mortar. He was with the Big Red One in Binjung province, where I had gone for Rosh Hashanah. And although I didn't see him there, I found out that he died from a mortar shell that just went into his billet. I don't remember how Richard Aaron died, but those lives were very meaningful to me.
George, your memoir is beautifully written and very, very moving. During the entire first part of it, the word that kept running through my head was compartmentalization. It was the process that led you maintain your inner self and peace at the same time you were going through such a horrible experience. And clearly, starting with the Kent State killings, you underwent a process of integration and healing, where you started to bring together the two parts of your life, to integrate them, to reconcile them with each other, to bring yourself health.
It seems like a good analysis.
All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there. We're just about out of time. But George, thank you so much for your honesty and your beautifully written memoir. And we'll send out links to the moment piece. And we will all, this is being completely last. This is going to be recorded. It is, and we should have it up on the museum YouTube channel pretty soon. And we will send that out to everyone who registered. So thanks so much to everyone who's being here. And thank you so much again, George.